gray horse. The one who sat upon him was death, and hell followed with him. Greetings, everyone. This is the Ambassador coming at you with a brand new work video. And that quote is from, I think, one of the greatest films of the 1990s. And yes, we're going to jump ahead a little bit. We're going to do a film of the 90s today instead of a film of the 80s. And we're going to be talking about arguably one of the best westerns, historical westerns ever made, and that being Tombstone. And this is an absolute favorite movie of mine, and I am a fan, have been a fan of westerns the majority of my life. Grew up on the great ones, High Noon with Gary Cooper, all the films of John Wayne's career, all his great western films, True Grit and Rooster Cogburn, McClintock, The Searchers, El Dorado, the list goes on and on. And I would say that Tombstone fits very nicely in that category of great films, but also great western films and great films of the 1990s. And I did not have the opportunity to see Tombstone in theaters when it came out initially. I found this gem, well, like a lot of people probably did, on VHS back in the day. And it is one that I chronically rented and eventually got a copy of on VHS several, well, it's about 10, 15, maybe years ago or more. And anytime I had a really lousy day at work or just a lousy day in general, I would come home, I would kick off my shoes, I would throw Tombstone into the VCR or the DVD player or whatever the case may be, and I would just kick back and watch Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer and Bill Paxton and the great mustached one himself, Sam Elliott, do what they do best: kick ass. And this, I have seen other versions of the story of the gunfight at the OK Corral. I remember the old Western with, oh, for heaven's sakes, Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster, just simply called Gunfight at the OK Corral. But what we have with Tombstone is honestly, I think the best historical representation or depiction of the gunfight at the OK Corral and the events surrounding it. But what we have with Tombstone is not just that particular story, but a character exploration of the real life people of Wyatt Earp, John Doc Holliday, I'll be your Huckleberry. And this is, to say this movie is iconic is an understatement. It is an icon of the 90s, but it is also an icon of Western films, because about around the mid-1960s or late 1960s, the balloon bust on the Western movie genre, and you did not see a whole lot of Westerns being made anymore. And the fact that you had Kurt Russell and John P. Cassavetes, the director, although Kurt, for those of you who may not know this, John P. Cassavetes was not a terribly, I'm not saying he's a bad director, but he wasn't terribly experienced, and Kurt Russell had to come in and do what they call ghost direct and do a bit of ghost writing on the script for Tombstone. But what we have with Tombstone is a very, I think, as accurate as we can get depiction and representation of those events and the people that were involved with them. And not only that, you have a very interesting, albeit unconventional love story, because there is a bit of a love triangle within this story, because we see Wyatt Earp married to another woman who is his wife by law, as far as we understand it. But we have the character played by Kim Delaney of Josephine Marcus, a very talented and very beautifully ravishing actress. And this movie is so quotable and the scenes are so well known that it would take hours to list them all. But I just wanted to give I wanted to give my thoughts on this film, because honestly it is a very iconic film for me. It is one that stands out very prominently in my mind, because we don't get this type of depiction of real life people anymore, because unfortunately a lot of the real great stories have been told. I'm not saying that there aren't great personal stories out there that can't be told in film. There are. But you have this very interesting dynamic. You guys, you have the friendship between Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. You have the relationship between Wyatt Earp and his two brothers, Virgil and Morgan. You have the relationship of the members of the Cowboy Gang. Powers Booth as Curly Bill Brocious, Michael Biehn as Johnny Ringo. What's his name? The gentleman that plays Ike Clanton. And you get this very interesting picture that while these are men that are by no means angels, there is a sense of brotherhood within the Cowboys gang, and I think that is an interesting thing that is depicted in this film. Because the wonderful thing about Tombstone is very much told in a shades of gray way, because the real life history behind this is very sordid, and Wyatt Earp and his brothers weren't necessarily always the good guys. Not to say that the Cowboys were good guys either, but they were tolerated because they didn't cause a whole lot of trouble for people on the northern side of the border between the United States and Mexico. But the thing that intrigued me about this movie is you have at one point you have the family dynamic of the Earps and their wives, and you have the dynamic of Doc Holliday and his lady companion. Oh, what's her name? Kate. I think her name is Kate. And in real life, I think the woman's name was Horseface Kate, because she was not that attractive, but actually the actress who played her was rather lovely. But I think the big thing about Tombstone is although this is in part a revenge story, because for those of you who aren't familiar or who are familiar with the story of Tombstone, you have a series of events that almost should not have happened but did, because of circumstances that were seemingly beyond the control of both parties. Well, in particular, the Wyatts. The Wyatts could have stayed, or the Earps could have stayed out of the business of the town of Tombstone, and they could have just done what they had come there to do: make money, get into business, and live their lives. But unfortunately, Virgil, being a man of principle, could not just stand idly by and watch the good people of Tombstone, be abused and terrorized by the Cowboy Gang. And this is almost like you seeing a snowball at the top of a hill, and it just starts to pick up momentum and speed, and events start to spiral very heavily out of control. And it all could have been avoided. But the wonderful thing about this is we get a real depiction of these historical figures, of Wyatt Earp, of his brothers, of the Cowboys, of John Doc Holliday. And these are not perfect people. These are people that are just as flawed and imperfect as we are. But they are caught up in events in history that, as we look back on them nearly a century later or so, we can see that perhaps things could have gone differently, but obviously didn't. But I think one of the reasons why this movie resonates with so many people is because we see ourselves in the position of Wyatt. We see our family wronged. We see a sibling murdered. We see another sibling maimed. We see lives threatened. And Wyatt goes back into what he does best. He goes back to being a lawman. But he is a lawman slightly unhinged because of the events that have transpired. He tries to fight against getting involved in the politics and the society of Tombstone, but his brother Virgil's like, Wyatt, if we're going to make a life here for our families, if we're going to have any type of future here, it has to have some law and order. We can't just let these guys run roughshod all over us. And Wyatt's like, guys, I've been mixed up in this stuff enough. I don't want any more of it. This is a Wyatt Earp who isn't seeking armed conflict. This is a man who simply wants to go into business and live his life with his wife. Unfortunately, it's not the best marriage, and I'll go into that here in a few minutes. But Wyatt's just like, guys, this is trouble we don't need. All you're going to do is cause us more grief, and we don't need it. But Virgil and Morgan's the younger brother. He's played by Bill Paxton. He says to Wyatt, he's like, I just did what I thought you would do. He's like, we're brothers. I try to back my brother's position. Or as he said, I try to back my brother's play. And I can understand where Virgil's coming from, because society is governed by a sense of law and order. And Tombstone seemingly had none, because you have the town marshal, Frank White, killed by Curly Bill Brocious, and you have the county sheriff, John Behan, who's practically in the pocket of the Cowboys as it is. He's a sympathizer. And you've got the mayor who's trying to keep things together as best he can, and he goes to the Wyatts, or he goes to the Earps. Sorry about this, folks. He goes to the Earps and implores them, please, y'all were lawmen. 2 of you were. Can you please step in and do something? Otherwise, this town's just going to get torn apart by these guys. But Wyatt is the voice of reason, and the mayor is speaking. And he's like, sorry, mayor, we're not getting involved. But eventually, Virgil forces their hand, and they do get involved in the politics and the society of Tombstone. But I think the other interesting thing about this story is very much a revenge story. It is very much a historical revenge story. Because Wyatt Earp is on I don't want to necessarily use, for lack of a better word, he is on a crusade to destroy the Cowboys. He makes his position very plain to Ike Clanton there on the train platform. The Cowboys are done. Do you hear me? They are finished. I see a red sash. I shoot the man wearing it. So run, you cur. You tell him I'm coming. You tell him the law's coming. He is emphatic. The Cowboys have had their day. It is done. He's going to make them bleed. Make them bleed as red as those red sashes that they wear. And that's something I think a lot of us can respect. Because if we see our loved ones hurt or killed, we're going to go to the utmost ends to see that wrong righted. And I think that's something that is very much lacking in society nowadays, is this idea that you stand up for your own, you stand up for your convictions, you stand up for your beliefs. Wyatt Earp does. He takes up the sword. He takes up his gun again. But he does it regretfully, because he did not want to go this route. He did not want to have to shed blood. But he had no other recourse. And the thing that I love about, there's one particular scene in Tombstone. It's right after the attack on the Earp family. You see Wyatt sitting on that wagon, one brother maimed, has lost the use of one arm, and you see another, seemingly the other brother is in a coffin, and they're taking Morgan to be buried. But you see a seemingly very dejected, very defeated Wyatt, and they pull up right in front of the Cowboys, right in front of Curly Bill Brocious, right in front of Johnny Ringo, Ike Clanton, and a couple of the other Cowboys. And Wyatt doesn't even look him in the eye. He's like, "I want you to know it's over. It's done." And Curly Bill just very smugly says, "Well, bye." And they just pull off and leave. But the very next moment, the very next scene, you see Wyatt Earp full of fire and vengeance and rage. And I think that's something that very much speaks to the human spirit. Because we all have that drive within us for there to be a sense of justice. True justice. But for Wyatt, it's more than just taking up the badge of a sheriff again, of a lawman again. For him, this is personal. The Cowboys have hurt his family, and he's going to make them bleed for it. And there's another very iconic scene where they get into a shootout with the Cowboys and everything, and they were by a river. And they are surrounded. And you actually have, there's two other fellas, Turkey Creek Jack Johnson and Jack Vermillion, who have joined Wyatt and Doc Holliday. And we'll get to Doc in a minute. And they are surrounded. And Wyatt is like, "Nope, I am not going out like this. No way in hell." And he wades out into the middle of the creek, and he gets into a showdown between him and Curly Bill. And Wyatt's got 2 6-shooters, and he's just mowing Cowboys down. And Curly Bill tells him to hold off, don't shoot him, he's mine. And Curly Bill wades out into that same creek, and he starts popping off and everything with his shotgun. 2 blasts, doesn't even get near, kind of gets near Wyatt, but doesn't hit him. And Wyatt gets the drop on Curly Bill, shoots him dead. Done. But you see the rage, and you see the hurt, and you see the heartache in Wyatt. But at the same time, he's like, these guys are going to pay. You believe it. And there's a conversation in the aftermath of that shootout, because they do break the lines of the Cowboys, and they run. And you see Wyatt's group catching their breath. And I think it's Turkey Creek makes the comment, they remind, no, it was Bat Masterson, because he was, or McMasters, because played by Michael Rooker. For those of you who are aware, he played Yondu in Guardians of the Galaxy. But he makes the comment, if they were my brothers, I'd want revenge too. And Doc Holliday, one of his great lines, he's like, no, make no mistake. It isn't vengeance he's after. It's a reckoning. Doc's right. What Wyatt is after is not revenge, it's a reckoning. Blood has been taken, and he wants his pound of flesh. He wants the blood repaid. But the other great part of this movie is the relationship between Wyatt and Doc Holliday. And the other two brothers don't have a very high opinion of Doc Holliday. They see him as kind of a gambler, kind of a low life in a manner of speaking. But Wyatt and Doc have a very good friendship. They have a very good rapport. And even though the fact that Doc is dealing with tuberculosis or anything, it's killing him, he goes on this last ride with his best friend. And Val Kilmer plays that part masterfully. At least in my opinion, he does. And he has some of the best lines. In some cases, he really steals the movie at some points, because his comments are yet so morbid, yet so hilarious. And I absolutely love the exchange towards the end of the movie. Y'all probably know what scene I'm talking about. It's that last showdown between Johnny Ringo and Doc Holliday. It's supposed to be Wyatt there, but it's Doc. And he walks up from out of the shadows. He's like, takes a cigarette out of his mouth. He's like, why, Johnny Ringo, looks like somebody walked over your grave. And Johnny's like, fight's not with you, Holliday. And Doc's like, I beg to differ, sir. We started a game we didn't get to finish. Play for blood, I believe it was. And Ringo's trying to talk his way out of it. He's like, I was just funning about. Doc was like, I wasn't. And you see that switch in Johnny Ringo's face, and he goes just almost psychotic. He's like, all right, Lunger, let's do it. And you have that close-up on Doc's mouth. Say when. And they're circling one another there in that grove of trees. And this is almost like, it's a gunfight, but it's almost like a samurai fight, sword fight. And with two movements, Doc Holliday ends the life of Johnny Ringo, and he doesn't even break a sweat. And you see Wyatt run up, and he's like, what happened? He's like, and Doc is like, I'm afraid the stress was more than he could bear. And he takes Wyatt's badge off, because Wyatt gives him his badge or anything before they part ways. And Doc puts the badge on Johnny. He's like, I'm afraid my hypocrisy only goes so far. And then you have that very beautiful scene, and I use that word deliberately, beautiful scene towards the end of the movie between Wyatt and Doc, where they're there in the hospital. And Doc implores Wyatt, go find that spirited young actress and make her your own. Live every day, Wyatt. Live right up to the hilt. Live it Live it for me. Because John knows he's going to die. And all Wyatt can say in response, because he's so heartbroken because he knows his friend's about to die, is, "Thank you for always being there for me, Doc." Now that's true friendship. I am thankful to say that I have that type of friendship in my life. And I have that same type of love that Wyatt and Josephine had as well. Because the way that Wyatt loves Josephine is the way I love my wife, Madam Ambassador. But guys, that's my thoughts on Tombstone. If you have further thoughts and everything, by all means, comment down below. If you like this video, hit that like button. And by all means, please share this video and what have you. And my last video I did a shout out for a fellow YouTuber who is a kind of a unknown in a manner of speaking. So I think I'm going to start doing this for my work videos and maybe for my general posts and everything. There is a gentleman that I follow by the name of Adega Outlaw. He's a YouTuber and he has a very interesting channel. And I say that very complimentary. He is a writer. He does a lot of his own fan fictions, ranging from science fiction to fantasy, and some that blend those two genres with fantasy and science fiction. I will post his link to his channel in the description down below. He also has a book and everything available on Amazon called Evolution. So if y'all are interested in anything like that, I highly suggest you check out his channel. He does do, he writes all his own material, and he narrates it and he puts it with artwork that kind of fits the narrative that he's telling. So, until next time, my friends, y'all have a good day, and this is the Ambassador, signing off.